Okay, we'll get started then. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for this live changes question and answer session today on the 2020 infrastructure assessments for GRESB. My name is Rick Walters. I'm the Director of Infrastructure. I've got to say it's certainly a strange time, and it's really unfortunate that we had to cancel our in-person trainings this year, but we're very glad we can interact with so many of you today via this webinar. This changes Q&A session is focused on recurring GRESB participants. We'll assume you've participated in GRESB in the past years and undertaken at least one of the online changes training lessons. We held a separate Q&A session or sessions last week for new participants, and we may do some more. So please note that this session is being recorded and will be made available online for use by others who couldn't make it today. All right, next slide. We'll talk about who's on the call today. Almost the entire infrastructure team is dialing in, which is great. And I'd like to introduce you to Katie, David, Aurelian, and Lisa today. Everyone's working from home in Amsterdam, and we've agreed not to switch on our cameras to ensure good sound quality, of course. And in my case, so there are no unintended guest appearances from my new pupils. Those of you who are homeschooling will know exactly what I mean. You'll hear from a number of people today during the webinar, and we feel it's always nice to put a face to the name. So let's kick off with some introductions. As I said before, I'm Rick Walters, Director of Infrastructure at GRESB. I've been with GRESB for 2.5 years. I'm an engineer by background with more than 25 years experience in infrastructure right across the asset life cycle. I'm very proud to lead the dedicated and hardworking infrastructure team at GRESB, and I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Katie.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I joined GRESB in September last year as an associate. Previously, I worked in sustainability consulting and as a sustainability advisor in a large Dutch construction company. Since I've been at GRESB, I've worked on the asset performance component, and I am involved in some of our governance groups, such as the Infrastructure Benchmark Committee and our working group on developments.
Thanks, Katie. Next, David.
Hi there, everyone. My name is David Tassado. I'm an analyst at GRESB and have been working with GRESB for just over 2 years. My areas of expertise include the fund assessment, validation, and public disclosure. On the side, I'm also secretariat for the Infrastructure Advisory Board. Aurelian?
Hi everyone, I'm also an analyst at GRESB and have been at GRESB for 2 years. My areas of expertise within GRESB include the GRESB materiality assessment and SDG mapping. I've also been involved in the updates of the 2020 GRESB resilience module with our new climate change science specialist, Eric Landry, who couldn't make the call today. But on to our new intern, who just started today, Lisa.
Hello everyone, I'm Lisa Tassis, and actually I just arrived indeed today to start my internship and to finish my master in management and focusing especially on sustainability and resilience.
Great, thanks guys. So now you know who's at the receiving end of any questions sent via our GRESB contact form. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you need support. We're here to help, especially during this unusual period for all of us. You'll hear from most of our team today as we answer your questions. We also may have some of our regional representatives on the line today. I'm just going to check the list to check if anyone's been able to join us so far. I'm just having a quick look through. Okay, it looks like none of our regional reps have been able to join as yet, so they might join during the call. I know that there's another meeting on at the same time. But yeah, it's good to post them up there, and they're also a good contact for you, particularly for more of the commercial side and the business development side of activities. I'd also like to recognise our partners. Next slide. Our global partners, WSP and PwC, who are supporting this webinar today. And these partners were going to be involved in our in-person webinar, so it's great that they can support us online. Next, we'll have a quick look at our setup for today with using Zoom. You're probably all getting pretty familiar with these kind of platforms, and perhaps Zoom you're familiar with as well. But just to direct us today, I hope everyone was able to join using their computer. It's definitely the best experience using the computer rather than just a phone. There are a few features that aren't available by dial-in, so hopefully you've been able to do that. We're going to start with some questions that were submitted to us ahead of the Q&A, and then we'll be taking other questions. To ask questions, we've got two methods. You can type them in using the Q&A feature down the bottom, So use the Q&A button if you want to type in a question, rather than the chat feature. Don't use the chat feature for asking questions, please. We won't be looking at it for questions. So use the Q&A question button, and we will look for those questions and farm them out amongst the team. If you would like to ask a question more verbally, then there's the raise a hand option. So click on that if you've got a question that you'd like to verbally talk about, and we will look for you. When we get to your question, we will unmute you, introduce you, and give you a chance to ask your questions. So just use either of those methods that you prefer and comfortable with, and be patient if you're waiting for your question to be answered. The next slide shows the agenda for today, what we're going to cover. We'll keep the attempt is to keep our introductory activities fairly short, and to really get stuck into your questions. So this is your session for you. I can see we've got about 17 attendees so far, which is great. We want to give you as much of this time as possible. Before we get into that though, we have got a short anonymous poll to get a feel of who's online. So we'll open that now. You should see a poll pop up on your screen. Scroll down in that window, answer all the questions, and press submit. And then you'll be able to press the polling button to close and to pull up the results once we close the poll. So we'll tell you when we've closed the poll and you can see the results. So just go and do that now. There's a bunch of questions there to find out a bit more about you. While you're doing that, moving on to the next slide, I'll give you a quick update on GRESB and COVID-19. Certainly during this unprecedented time, this COVID-19 outbreak, we understand that the top priority for asset managers, operators, and our whole industry is to keep your employees, customers, and our communities safe, and to ensure that our infrastructure continues to support society. We're also aware that our investor members are dealing with a very challenging financial market. So in response to member feedback and guidance from our governance bodies, we've decided to extend both the real estate and infrastructure assessment submission deadlines by 1 month to August the 1st. The new deadline will have an impact on the timing of response checks, the validation process, the review period, the launch of results, and distribution of benchmark reports. So we've updated our timeline accordingly, and we will continue to keep the situation under close review. It's very important we stay connected through this reporting period. This is why we will schedule additional meetings with our advisory boards and benchmark committees to keep appraised of developments in different regions and sectors. We've also published a feedback form on our website to understand the impact of COVID-19 on you and explore actions being taken to manage the crisis. So we really encourage you to complete this feedback form to provide us with your valuable feedback, and we will monitor that regularly. We'd also like to thank you for your ongoing commitment to sustainability, transparency, and reporting. The portal has opened on April the 1st as planned, and the GRESB team is dedicated to working with you through these challenging times. And these times really underline just how interconnected and interdependent we all are. And we're very open to any suggestions you may have for actions GRESB can take to support the industry during these difficult times. We're open to taking further actions, but that will be based on the feedback and intelligence that we gather. All right, so let's close the poll now, and let's have a bit of a look at the results briefly before we get into some more questions. So, have you logged into the GRESB assessment portal? By far, the majority of you have, which is great. Infrastructure lessons in the training portal. Looks like there's about a third of you that haven't yet, but plan to undertake the lessons. Over half of you have had a go at the asset assessment changes, which is great, and then another third, let's say, have had a go at other lessons. So that's great that you're getting stuck into those, and there's a lot of great material there for you guys who particularly have are recurring participants mainly. The changes sessions are going to be the most valuable to you, I think. That brings us on to the third question. What's your experience with GRESB? There's say 1 in 5 of you who it's your first time and the first time as a participant for your company or fund. Almost 44% of you, it's your first time, but not the first time for your entity. And then there's a mixture of second year, third year, and looks like 1 5th year. So yeah, that adds up, I guess. So we've got probably a mixture of certainly recurring participants, some that are new, but their entity has been participating before, so they probably have some idea. And I don't want to forget that there's about a fifth of you who this is completely new in terms of you haven't participated in GRESB before. Question 4, are you working from home? All of you are. So perhaps no surprise there. That seems to be pretty common that most developed countries are going through a lockdown process, and most of our kind of jobs are working from home. How are you managing with that? Over half of you are trying to stay positive. Half of you are saying it's all right. One is saying it's tough. A third are looking forward to going back to the office, and another one has small children. So yeah, interesting response there. Thank you very much for completing that. That does give us a bit of a picture. As I said earlier, we will try to focus on those who are recurring participants, but there may be a bit of an opportunity for those who are completely new to ask questions. We did have the sessions last week, as I said, from new participants. And those sessions were recorded and will be put up for people to view. So for those who are brand new and wanting more information, they might be worth having a look at too. All right, let's have a quick look at the GRESB timeline that I mentioned. As I'm sure you know, the portal opened as usual on April 1st. I said that earlier. And this year, the deadline is the 1st of August, so 1 month extra. Response checks can be booked from now on, or from the portal opening onwards, up until the 1st of July, subject to availability. For those who don't know, response checks are an additional paid service featuring a careful review of your assessment response, followed by a 1-hour discussion call. After that call, you receive a feedback report highlighting issues found. It's really intended to help ensure that no issues are overlooked in your submissions and give you an opportunity to ask for additional guidance on certain indicators. You don't need to have completed your assessment to make a booking for a response check, but by the time you come around to close to your call, you do need to complete your assessment so that all the material that's reviewed is complete. There's a bit of a layout there of how to request a response check. I won't go through it in too much detail. It's pretty straightforward. Our training, of course, coming back onto the timeline, our training's been open since March, since sometime in March, but we have been uploading lessons progressively. So we only uploaded those changes sessions quite recently. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those, definitely encourage you to have a look at the changes training lesson. There's lots of good material there. There's nothing in the training that isn't already in the reference guides, but we know that some people have different learning styles and might prefer training to reading, if you like. It is focused on kind of newcomers, the basic training, apart from those changes sessions. Then finishing off the timeline, following the portal close, validation is undertaken, then scoring, after which we release our preliminary results to participants, those participants only, on the 1st of October. It's a 2-week review period for participants, during which they may request a validation or scoring review. And after that, results are finalized and launched on the 1st of November. All right, on to the next slide. Now we'd like to get stuck into your questions. We're going to go through them in the order shown in that agenda, but just to provide a bit of structure and cluster things together that are common issues. So let's see how that goes, and we can move things around as necessary. We'll start with the infrastructure asset assessment and its entity and reporting characteristics. So we'll open that up for questions. We have had one in advance, which I'm happy to answer while we see if any other questions come in. So the question that was asked in advance about entity and reporting characteristics is, what constitutes an asset entity when an investable asset is composed of multiple facilities? For example, 175 preschools and 10 care homes across 3 Scandinavian countries. Okay, so various questions come up like this about what is an entity for reporting purposes. And our advice is, well, when completing multiple assessments, it does allow comparisons between assets, and we do strongly encourage that. So we do strongly encourage reporting at a fairly granular level. A single assessment, though, can take less time if the relevant data is more readily available at the aggregated level. If a participant elects to report on multiple facilities in a single asset assessment, then it's strongly recommended that the aggregation be kept at a single sector and country combination. Otherwise, peer group comparisons are likely to be far less specific and useful. So I'll go through that example. So it's really up to the participant is the answer, but broadly we say the more granular is generally the better. And if you are going to aggregate, don't aggregate generally past a sort of a sector and country combination. And using the example here, 175 preschools and 10 care homes across 3 Scandinavian countries. What we would say there is if you do want to aggregate, you might aggregate, say, preschools in Sweden and say, okay, there's 30 preschools in Sweden and they're going to report as one asset assessment. Then what you wouldn't do is say aggregate preschools and care homes in Sweden, because you then end up in a sort of a diverse sector grouping for peer groups. And similarly, you wouldn't aggregate preschools in Sweden and Norway, because it's then going to move up to a broader region like Europe in peer grouping. So that's our broad recommendations, but we do recognize that it is sometimes complicated and quite bespoke to make these decisions. So I encourage you to contact us if you've got specific things you'd like to talk through on that. We've got one other question here. We have added in the reporting characteristics 2 indicator on size, that there's a new indicator question on number of contractors. So the question's been asked, what does a contractor mean in this context? Does it mean the number of temporary workers or the number of companies which work for our entity at our sites? So our answer is it means contractor workers. That is workers on the asset sites that are not employees of the asset entity. They instead work for a separate company that's engaged under a contract. So it's not contract companies. It's not necessarily temporary workers. It's certainly not temporary workers who are on a contract. But it is workers for contract companies who are working on the entity's site. Okay, that's the main questions that relate to reporting, entity reporting characteristics for the asset assessment. Haven't had any other questions come in yet on that. So we might move on to the next sort of topic grouping, which is the asset assessment management component. So I think, as everyone hopefully knows, the asset assessment and the fund assessment are split into management and performance components, 2 components. So we're going to look at the management component for the asset assessment next. We have had a question come in advance on this one, which I'm happy to answer. So the question is, could you be so kind to explain what does it mean exactly, diminishing increase in score approach, regarding in particular stakeholder engagement program, SE1, supply chain engagement program, SE2, and stakeholder grievance process, SE3.1. So I'll hand over to my colleague David to have a go at this question. David?
Thanks, Rick. Could you please allow me to share my screen? Possible first?
Sure. Rillian, can you do that?
There we go. Okay. So yeah, I think if we explain the scoring approach for the first case, which is the stakeholder engagement program indicator, then it will be clear for the others as well. So let's have a look at this indicator scoring using the scoring documents. Let me just pull that up here. So as you can see here, there are 2 sets of elements underneath the main indicator question. One on the elements of the stakeholder engagement program, worth 3/5 of the score, and one on stakeholders engaged, worth 2/5 of the score. For the first set of elements, each element is worth 1/7 of the score, but using a diminishing increase in score approach. This means that rather than each element being linearly worth 1/7 of the score for that section, a curve is fitted such that the first option is worth more than 1/7. The next element selected is then rewarded slightly less, and so on down until the 7th option, worth much less than 1/7. The curve in the end might look something like this. If I pull up a little bit further into the scoring document, you will see an example at the top here. Yeah. So in the case here, I can zoom in a little bit. In the case here, we have 10 options, but in the case of the indicator, we had 7. So let's say you needed to select 7 options to get the full score for that section, but the first options are worth obviously much more than the last. So if you select, say, 3 of the options, you might get around 60% of the points, which in turn is worth about 3/5, so 60% of 3/5. The same sort of approach goes for the other sections on stakeholders, which came after this first indicator which we've gone through, as well as any other scenario in the asset or fund assessment which uses a diminishing score approach. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Good answer. Hopefully that's answered that for if that person was online, but anyway, useful to all of you. We have had another question come in from the Q&A, which is great. This says, my team and I have a question concerning indicator LE3. So for everyone, that's about ESG objectives. Despite no changes in indicator structure, we notice you raised the maximum points from 2.2 to 3.6. And we're wondering why such a change in scoring if you didn't change the structure of the indicator. Okay, so let me have a bit of a go at that one. So with that one, I guess let me broadly explain what happens with with the whole review process, but also the review of scoring. We go through a process every year of reviewing a whole bunch of things, the results of the assessment each year, what's going on in the industry, and feedback from participants. And we consult very closely with what we call our governance groups, which is our infrastructure advisory board, comprised of institutional investors, LPs primarily, and our infrastructure benchmark committee, which is comprised of fund managers, asset operators, and consultants. And so we talk to those bodies right through a sort of period from about September right through to February, and talk about what sort of changes might be necessary to improve the assessment year on year. And they can involve all kinds of changes. Some quite structural, like the change to management performance components. Some quite minor, down to sort of guidance issues and things like that. And scoring is, of course, one of the things we definitely talk to them about. So certain things needed to change with scoring because of the split into management and performance components. That drove some of the changes. We also obviously changed indicators in general. There were a few indicators removed, a few indicators added. So there was that causes things to fluctuate. And we also did a lot of work to align more closely to other external frameworks and to our own real estate assessment. And so that sort of also resulted in some changes. But you're right, this indicator didn't change a lot, but the score did change. So in reviewing the scoring specifically, we looked at the scores for all of the indicators, and we wanted to reach that 50% of the score for the management component and 50% of the score for the performance component in the asset assessment. And that required a little bit of juggling of the scores to get to that. So we tended to try to keep the approximate weighting from last year carrying through to this year, but to go to that 50% for management, 50% for performance. And what that meant is that in general, in the management side, a lot of the indicators did go up in score a little bit, like this one, except in specific cases where things like we merged indicators, and also there was feedback that indicators should not be weighted so highly. So, but generally in the main, they stayed about the same or went up slightly, and that's the reason for the change in this one. And this was all run past our governance groups in terms of them accepting or endorsing the changes that were proposed. So certainly happy to, we always take feedback on this each year, and happy to keep on collecting that feedback. And we want to continue to be completely transparent about what everything is worth, what the scores are. And that's why we provide that scoring in advance, as you've rightly pointed out. I hope that answers your question. There's probably a more detailed answer if you want to go through all the ins and outs of tiny changes in scores, but hopefully that gave you the general kind of answer. Okay, we haven't had any more questions come in yet on the asset assessment management component, but certainly happy to to take any more on that. Let's see if there's any others in advance. No. Okay, I might move on to the next topic, which is the asset assessment performance component. Are there any questions on this one? This is the one where there's a lot of quantitative data collected. Certainly happy to answer any questions on that. Let me just check if any hands have gone up as well. Sorry, just check that. Okay, no hands up yet, so that's fine. Oh, great, we've got a question come in, so that's great. Okay, what's the rationale for adding the LE2 new question this year? Okay, great question. That is in the management component, but absolutely happy to answer it. So we did add a question in the asset assessment on ESG leadership commitments. It is a new question, and being a new question, we generally start them as unscored, and that's what we've done. So it's not scored, but it is there for reporting purposes. And look, it may be scored next year depending on feedback and so forth. So why did we add it? Well, there's a few reasons. I guess in general, in terms of industry trends, there are more and more commitments being made, almost seems like weekly, by investors and by companies to various ESG causes and principles, I guess. And this is definitely a trend and something that is quite significant in the industry. And I guess it's also part of showing how people approach ESG, and that's, I guess, what we're about, and particularly in the management side. So we've noted that trend. This indicator has been in the fund assessment and the real estate assessment for some time. And so looking at what those assessments were recording, we modeled this indicator in the asset assessment on that and introduced it this year. And we only kept in the commitments that we thought were relevant to an asset business as opposed to a more fund business, which is more of an investor. So it doesn't include a series of commitments that might be made by investors, like to say the principles for responsible investment, but it does include commitments that can be made by companies, corporations, and the like. And that's why it's there. Hopefully it does provide value to you from a benchmarking perspective, seeing what other commitments companies are making, and also to your investors when they view the answers to these questions. Hope that answers your question. Okay. Any more questions on the asset assessment, performance, or indeed management component? Okay, we might then ask about materiality-based scoring and the GRESB materiality assessment. We did make some changes to that this year to refine how that works, but in principle, very similar to last year. But certainly happy to answer any questions about materiality-based scoring and our materiality assessment. Okay, nothing coming in there yet. All right. Okay, let's move on to the fund assessment and its entity and reporting characteristics. Are there any questions on this? Okay, we haven't got any questions in advance on this one, and neither on the fund assessment management component, but certainly happy to answer any. We have, next topic was the fund assessment performance component. This isn't a separate assessment to complete. It is based on the fund's underlying assets, which must be linked or connected to the fund. Any questions on that, the linking of assets to funds and how that affects scores and all of that side of things? Again, that hasn't changed a great deal from last year, but we have clarified some of the terminology around that and the exclusions and so forth. Okay, nothing coming through yet on that. Okay, We'll move on to validation and scoring. We have had a question in advance on that, so I'll ask that one. This is regarding evidence. In the 2019 reference guide, it was this person is saying it was really easy to understand what evidence was mandatory, optional, or not mandatory. But for 2020 assessments, they have some doubts, especially the performance component. The performance indicators, e.g. energy, greenhouse, etc. For long-term targets, is that evidence optional, question mark? And the 2019 targets, well, this was last year, of course, it's talking about, are they optional, question mark? And then finally, indicators EM1, EM2, CU1, so employees and customers. Is evidence optional for these? I'll hand over to my colleague Katie to give you an answer on that one, because I think they're all pretty similar as a group.
So evidence is not required for the performance component. You're always encouraged to provide an additional context to your response in the text boxes for each indicator, but we are not requiring evidence at this point, at least for scoring. Great,
thanks, Katie. Yeah, so this it won't have evidence, it won't be manually validated, and it's certainly fair to say that at this point, we're really focused on transparency of performance and targets. So reporting of your performance, reporting of your targets, whether you have targets, not so much their numerical value at this stage. So whether targets exist, whether performance is recorded, not what it is. That will certainly change over the next few years. There'll be much bigger focus more and more on what is reported and what the numbers mean, and are they good versus not so good. But that's going to take a few years of evolution to move towards. So for that reason, we're not interested necessarily in scoring the number that's provided. We're interested in what the number is and reporting that to investors, and therefore there's real no benefit in manually validating that information. We can do that through automatic validation by the computer checking if that field has been filled in. So hopefully that answers your question. I'll just see if any other questions have come in or hands up. Nothing there yet. Okay. Well, I'll move on to the last topic, which is the resilience module. The resilience module is now in its third year. It's an optional module, as many of you will hopefully know. Next year, it will become integrated into the main assessment, so it won't be optional anymore. So it's a good chance by having a go at the resilience module to prepare for next year, and also to get a sense of how you're going from a resilience perspective. And it does align with the TCFD recommendations. So if you're interested in knowing how you're going against TCFD, it can also be a good tool for that. So any questions on the resilience module? Okay, nothing coming in there. That's fine. All right, well, we've kind of come to the end of the topics, but I'm certainly happy, or we're certainly happy to answer any other questions at all about GRESB and about the assessments, anything that can assist you. We've still got quite a bit of time left, and we're happy to use that talking to you today. Okay, haven't seen any hands go up yet or further questions. Okay, another one's come in, which is great. I have a question regarding the change from what was called MA7 last year to EM1. Why did this split happen, and why did you keep only the employees section of this indicator? So let's have a quick look. Just get my right view in front of me here. Yeah, so we have moved that indicator to the performance component, if you like, effectively we didn't have a management component last year, but if it had stayed in the the management aspect. It would have stated the management component. And that's because it largely does measure actual performance in terms of employees and specifically employee engagement. Why did you keep only the employees section of the indicator? Let me just bring up last year's quickly in front of me so I can give you an informed answer on that one. Okay, so MA7, just to clarify for everyone's benefit, was largely related to ESG training, and it did split last year into employees, contractors, operators, and other. And then within those talked about ES and G types of training. So yeah, I think what you're meaning there is in terms of only keeping employees is we didn't have contractors, operators as a separate, or an other in fact, as a separate aspect element underneath that when we've incorporated this year. We wanted to align very well to other reporting frameworks here and to our real estate assessment. So that was where that change came from. In this kind of context, employees can be a broad definition. So it might be that contractor or employees on site are also covered by some training, and that could be used to describe what you're doing, particularly if you've got, say, an all contractor workforce. That may be quite relevant. But strictly splitting into employees and contractors, we decided not to do this year for alignment reasons. We have had another question come in. The entity we operate has CO2 limits and reporting requirements. The reports are reviewed by regulatory agencies for accuracy and made publicly available. Does this count as third-party validation? So hopefully we can just clarify this first, perhaps, in regard to which indicators. So I'll try to clarify that and perhaps ask some more around that, or clarify, or put up your hand if you want to jump in with some more context. But I think you might be talking here about data assurance on the greenhouse gas indicator within the performance section. Because it seems like you're getting onto that angle. So let's assume you're talking about that, but please jump in if that's not the question you really want answered. So we'll answer it from that perspective, as in, oh, it looks like someone might have raised their hand. Okay, all right, so what I might do is, why don't we answer that question from an assurance perspective, and then we'll ask the. No, that's okay. Let's get the person who raised their hand to talk, because it may be a clarification of this question. If not, we can always come back to it. So we'll hand over to Dean Ritz, who has a question.
Yes,
go ahead.
That is it. We do have to report the data on a regular basis, and it is thoroughly reviewed by the regulatory agencies, and does that count as assurance, because we don't need to get a third party to check it on a regular basis.
Okay, well, I might hand over to my colleague Katie to answer this, who's been focused on the performance component. Katie?
Yeah, hi, Katie here. Yes, potentially. So if you have a look at our appendixes in the reference guide, one of our appendices is regarding verification schemes, and we have a long list of them, and some of them are in relation to emissions trading schemes, reporting schemes that exist around the globe. So I would suggest having a look at that list to see if your scheme is in there as well. So then you can simply select that one for your verification and assurance. If not, please contact the help desk and give us some details on what your scheme does and why do you think it meets the requirements, and we can have a conversation whether we will include it either this year or potentially in the future.
And if, of course, it doesn't meet assurance or verification, it may still satisfy a check.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point, Rick. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question come in on resilience. Can external climate resilience assessments other than GRESB be used towards the resilience module or towards the GRESB assessment otherwise? I might hand over to Aurelian to have an answer, have a crack at this one.
Sorry, just unmuting myself here. Okay, sorry, would you mind just repeating the question, please?
Sure. Can external climate resilience assessments other than GRESB be used towards the resilience module or towards the GRESB assessment in other ways?
That's a good question. I'm not necessarily sure, but what I can tell you is that the GRESB resilience module strongly aligns with the TCFD, and that's the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. No specific alignment was conducted regarding to other resilience frameworks, but of course we do have several references in relation to climate change scenarios from the, for instance, like the IEA energy agencies, which may tie in with other potential climate framework. We didn't necessarily have a specific look at, for instance, the climate CDP reporting framework. But what I can tell you is that our assessment, once again, was closely created to tailor to physical, transitional, to some extent social risks, and that alignment with TCFD was further implemented. And so it does provide a good basis should you want to report to the TCFD in the future to sort of establish what kind of processes you currently have in place and to see how you fare on that side in terms of risk identification and mitigation in relation to climate related risks.
Thanks, Aurelian. Yeah, and I would just say it's probably good if you haven't had a look at the resilience module to have a look through the assessment, the reference guide, and the indicators, and it should probably become pretty apparent whether your kind of external climate resilience assessments are going to be helpful evidence or help you to answer the indicators in the assessment. It does ask about things like, have you done scenario modeling and things like that, so you'll know whether you've done that and can answer those questions. We have had another question coming on the resilience module. Despite it not being scored for the GRESB final scoring, as in within the asset assessment or within the fund assessment, evidence is on the responses are needed to get higher scoring on this module. That's a question. Is evidence needed to get higher scoring on this module? So just to clarify that, the resilience module itself is scored, but it doesn't contribute to the asset assessment score or the fund, the GRESB score for the fund either, but it is scored sort of on its own. So I might again ask Aurelian to have a go at that one. Is evidence used in scoring within the resilience module? I think that's what that is effectively asking.
Yeah, so no, not anymore. It is true that last year, in 2019, we did require evidence for reporting, but we've changed the module quite a bit this year and reshuffled things a bit. And we also asked for more sort of qualitative direct inputs, meaning that we no longer require evidence in the resilience module. The basis behind this is also because no validation is undergone for evidence in the resilience module. So of course, any of the answers should be reported truthfully, but that is sort of the premise that we have. So evidence will not affect scoring. Of course, you're very welcome to upload evidence. It is an option, should you want to, and should you want to disclose it to investors, fund managers, or even for your own reporting purposes.
Great, thanks for that. All right, let me just see if any other new questions have come in or hands up. Nothing coming in there. So on certainly happy, still got 15 minutes left. If anyone wants to ask anything else GRESB related by putting up their hand or asking a question, happy to address it. It looks like another hand has gone up from Dean again. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, if you could just give me
Just unmuting you there.
Yeah. Here we go. There you go, Dean.
Okay,
There
go
we
ahead,
are.
Dean.
Okay. We operate a power plant. It has a number of permits. Those permits all have limits on CO2 and other components. They're essentially targets. And I would like to say those are our targets, because if we don't meet them, we're in trouble. So can we call them targets?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we don't put any sort of too specific definition on what you adopt as targets. It's your communication internally and with your investors. So if you feel that they are your targets, that's what you're shooting for, and they're what are adopted. It's important that they're adopted by your organization. Then they can be your targets. You know, if they come from that, we can imagine that targets could come from all kinds of places. And so if regulatory pressure is what causes you to have certain targets, then that can be valid. It's just important that they are real targets, they are what you're shooting for, and they are, you know, formally adopted by your organization. So if anyone sort of came in and said, oh, what's your target for so-and-so, then people would, you know, people obviously who are responsible for that would know that is the target. It wouldn't be they wouldn't be surprised by that. Hopefully does that answer your question all right?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. There's another question come in just now on HS4, the health and safety of community. If an asset has a public right-of-way on their grounds, roads and footpaths, should the asset report incidents? What if they are not at fault, e.g. a motorbike accident? That's a good question. So the indicator doesn't get into whose fault anything is or anything like that. And certainly it doesn't score, you know, based on the number of incidents or anything like that. It's scoring on whether you can report. So it's really focusing on encouraging people to report their performance. And from this perspective, we would say that, you know, again, you need to have your own criteria for what a health and safety of the community incidents. But, you know, if you feel that they're related to your asset and in any way, whether they're your fault or not, then they're probably a good thing for you to be tracking. Think about it from this perspective. Are they an ESG risk for your business? And if you think that they are and they're material, then it's probably something you care about. It may not be necessarily always your fault, but it may be something that you can perhaps improve upon or contribute to making better. You know, the classic example being, say, a toll road. So a toll road operator doesn't necessarily have complete control over what all the vehicles are doing on their toll road, but they can have some influence over that by, you know, speed limits, the way they maintain the asset, the way they put up signs, the way that they monitor activities, and so on and so on. So, yeah, I think up to you to decide what your criteria for health and safety of community within your asset boundaries and outside. But good practice to report on anything that's kind of relevant to the asset, because it could present an ESG risk to your business and to your investors. Hope that answers your question. Just having a few come in there, so that's been great. Nothing else there right now, so I'll give you a few more seconds to have a bit of a think if there's anything else coming to your mind that you'd like to answer. Okay, well, looks like we've exhausted your questions, so hopefully you're completely informed now. We did hope you got a lot out of this session. Hope you're feeling even more comfortable to complete your GRESB assessments. Rest assured that in any case, we're here to help you, so please don't hesitate to contact us if you need support. Use our contact form during the reporting period. And we'll wrap it up there. We hope that you stay healthy, and bye for now.